Color is only one part of making realistic drawings. In this lesson, I'll go over how to show different textures with some new tools and different pencil strokes, and I'll show you how to use some extra equipment and some special tricks for special effects. Here are some examples of my own artwork. They're all green, but each one has a really distinctive texture. The first one is very smooth and satiny. The second one is kind of feathery and fluffy. And the last one is very spiky and spiny. These kind of effects really help to show exactly what we're drawing and create an extra dose of realism. Let me show you some new materials that may come in handy. The first is a stylus. A stylus is really a ballpoint tool. They come in all different weights and all different sizes of points, from very tiny, you can almost not see this one as a ballpoint at all, to very large. I'll use this to engrave the paper and create a resist where the color just won't go. It'll come in really handy, you'll see. The second thing I'd like to show you is solvent. This is a pen I like to use. It's a Copic Sketch Solvent pen. It's really meant for blending Copic markers, but the alcohol-based solvent in it is non-toxic and does a wonderful job of blending colored pencil. The advantage to this one is it has a brush tip that's flexible, so it's really like using a paintbrush. I've filled an empty one of these pens with one of my big surprises, baby oil. Regular Johnson's baby oil. The base of our colored pencils is mineral oil, and that's exactly what baby oil is. The last thing I'd like to show you is plain old waxed paper, like you probably have in your kitchen drawer right now. The waxy paper creates a wonderful lifter for pulling out little details in our work. I'll show you how to use it. If I were drawing a leaf, with some pressure, I can lay down some veins. You probably can't even see this happening. I barely can. I've got to be careful, and I'll show you where you can go wrong with this. But lo and behold, as I color in the background of the leaf, the veins pop right out. And the big surprise is that the darker I color, the more you see the veins. That can be really useful when you have a complicated vein structure or a complicated texture that you just want to save. Another way I've used this is to pre-sign artwork. When it's going to be dark, my signature just appears as I draw. Good trick. So we'll use a couple of different points of these styli to try some different effects. Another really useful tool is this solvent. Let me show you what happens when I mix a couple of colors. You can still see a little bit of the paper tooth through this. That's that white that you see. With the solvent pen, I'll just glide it across and you'll see those little white dots fill in. Can you see it just smoothing the color? It's a nice way to lay down a color base in order to get to a nice rich color right away. There's a little bit left on the point of my solvent pen. So before I would go to another color, I want to scribble that off on scratch paper. It'll stain the pen, but once I see clear over here, I'm good to go. I'll mix a little bit different blend here with a red and an orange, and show you what the baby oil does. It's essentially the same thing. I always test these markers on my hand to make sure they're not too wet. If you have too much liquid, you can stain the paper with the liquid, but you'll see the baby oil access the binder of the pencil and just create a really smooth tone. That idea came to me from the Faber-Castell company when they said mineral oil, it's the same thing in baby oil as in the pencils. The advantage of this, as opposed to pressing hard with that colorless blender we tried before, is that the paper tooth is intact. And when these dry in a couple of minutes, I can draw right over them with more pencil. The third one I want to show you is the waxed paper. I'm going to use I'll just use one of my styluses. The wax paper goes right over my colored pencil. Let's say I forgot a vein right here. With very little pressure, I can lift that vein right out. The trick here is to not press hard, or I'll be pushing the pigment right into the paper. And as I keep moving my wax paper, can you see the lift of color? The color is just sticking to the wax paper, and I can reclaim that vein. One last thing. We met our sticky tack before. I've got mine kneaded so that it's nice and soft. Let's say that I was working along on this leaf and I accidentally colored through all of my highlights. I can use the sticky tack to lift back color in a shape. So if I create a little bit of a point, I can pull back a highlight without starting all over. We've got these interesting new tools and materials. Let's combine them with our interesting pencil strokes and we'll make some great textures in drawings. I've got 3 different textures for us to start with. The flower petal is silky and smooth, the apple is nice and shiny and hard, and the pussy willows are soft and feathery. We'll take them one by one. You'll note that when I worked these out, I made a note of the pencils I used. It made it easy for me to pull them out again to use them with you. Let's start with this flower petal. I have just the faintest pencil line here to tell me what is the shape of my petal. For the flower petal to get that smooth, silky look, we're going to use some solvent, but we've got to put some pencil down first. I'll start with yellow all over this petal. I may stay out of my brightest highlights, but I really don't mind the yellow glowing through. I'll follow that up with this peachy red. And now I'm going to be a little bit more careful about where I lay it down. You'll notice my pencils are still really sharp. If you are finding that your pencils are dull, take a minute and sharpen them up before you go on. You'll get a much better result. What I'm drawing in here are the folds in the flower that go with sort of the natural veining of the flower. Fortunately, I don't have to pay any attention to a real flower because I'm just making this one up. So now I have a couple of layers of color down. For this smooth texture, we're going to use the blending pen with the alcohol-based blender that's for markers. On one end is a chisel tip. It's really hard, and if I use this tip, I'm going to leave sort of train tracks through my artwork. So I'm going to choose the other end. This is the soft brush end, and I'll use it just like a paintbrush. I'm mostly working on the red color that I laid down, letting it drag in through the yellow just a little bit. I'll be putting down plenty more layers, so this is just to establish my colors. You can see that where I've gone with the marker is getting smoother and smoother, but the places I've missed still look grainy, so it's easy enough to see where you need to go. I'll let that dry for a moment while I add in a little bit of my next tone, this darker red, to give a little bit more strength to the base of this petal. I'm just going to add in a little bit of dark. And in those folds, I'll deepen them just a little. You can see that it goes right over the area where I used the blender without any problem at all. I'll go back to my blending pen, the brush end again, and I needn't clean off the end because I'm really blending the same colors. I'm going to head back now to my middle tone, this 124, my pinker tone. And while this is still a tiny bit damp, it's actually melting the pigment off of the pencil as I apply it. So if I want something to look really separate, really defined, I'm going to wait until it's all dry, but I can use this to sort of paint in more color. And I'll add a little more of my dark for contrast. I'll hit this again with my yellow. This will also help blend a little bit. I'm using my yellow as a little bit of a blender. I'll go back to my blending pen. I want to be careful at the edges so that I don't go way out into the paper. You can see that I could drag some pigment and some of the blending liquid, and that'll dry to a color. On the one that's already dry, let me show you a little tip for getting a little bit more drama in. As these wet pigments dry, they're going to lighten a little bit. So you may want to go back in and add a few darks in key places without any more blending, just to pump up the drama. So that's a way to use the blending pen to get a smooth texture. The difference between that and a shiny texture, like on the apple, is that on a smooth texture, the highlights are diffused over a broader area of space. On something shiny, there's a midtone that comes right up to the highlight. Always remember that, and you'll get a good result. I'm going to get to this red apple pretty quickly. I'll go in the order of pencils that I noted here. So I think about this. When I cut open an apple, what color is the flesh of the apple? Yellow. It's not red. That yellow glows through, so I'm going to put a little bit of yellow everywhere but in that brightest highlight. I don't have to be super careful with this because I'm going to be blending and adding lots of pigment, so I'm just sort of scribbling it on. But I want that look of yellow coming up through the red. I'll go immediately into my violet red. That's a complement to that yellow. So it'll dull both down a little bit, but it'll get me dark right away. I want to add in a couple of darks. So my third pencil here is this dark magenta. Right now my apple doesn't look too red. So I'm going to go to the red closest to an apple, that's 219, and just add a nice layer of red to start turning this odd little sphere into an apple. You can see I have a lot of pigment on my drawing right now, but it's kind of disorganized. I'm going to use my blender pen, and I'll also use the blending pencil to kind of pull this into shape. Now I'll use the pen to drag a little bit of pigment toward the highlight. It's a little bit of a cheat for not drawing it in really lightly, but it softens the edges of that highlight just a little bit too. While that dries, I'll add a little bit of dark, my dark violet, in the darkest areas. I'm choosing a violet because it'll have a nice shadowing effect on the red. At the moment, it looks like the purple is sitting right on top of the red, which it is. So I'm going to blend it back in with some more red. And I'm going to come closer to the edges. If I were in my studio, and if I were you, I would actually be turning the paper so that I could get to the edges. But I don't want to make you dizzy while I'm drawing. You'll notice there's a little bit of a lighter area right here at the lower right. That's where light would reflect from the surface back up onto my spherical object, and I want that because it allows it to look round instead of like a little dome. Just for fun, let's add a little bit of a stem here so you get the idea of how to do this. It's a slightly different texture. I'm using a dark brown, and then I'll touch it up with a little bit of green. All I need now are some more shadows. I want to make that stem sit right down in the apple. So I'll punch in a little shadow right behind it. And I feel like this stem would cast a shadow too. So I'll just lightly pull that out across the apple. Now I'm using pressure to blend everything together and to pull up that shine. I'm working toward my highlight, pulling in a little bit more tone. This is the only time that I really like to use this technique of burnishing down and flattening the tooth of the paper, because for something shiny, I think it kind of works. To finish this apple, I would tighten up the edges and add just a little more color. In fact, let me show you what I would do. To heighten that yellow we started with, I'm going to add a little bit of orange into this red on the one that I finished. And it helps it become not flat, not one color, but really glow as a red apple. I'd like to show you how to do something really fun. The fluffy pussy willow looks hard to draw, but it's just a combination of stylus strokes and those eyelash strokes we learned before. Let me show you how it works. The shape of the pussy willow catkin is kind of an oval, and I am just going to use my stylus to press in some hairs. I'm doing a big one here. This would work just as well for hairs on a stem or little thorns. And as always with texture, it's the juxtaposition of one texture to the next that makes it really work. Now here's where the magic starts. I have a light gray pencil, and I'm just going to start drawing in that oval, and you'll see the little hairs pop right up. So far so good, but it doesn't really have a 3D look yet. Pussy willows are kind of gray and brown, so I'm going to add in a little bit of brown near the core of that pussy willow catkin. Can you see the hairs starting to pop up? I need some dark to give it 3 dimensions, so I'll add a little bit of dark here. And I'm going to use a dark brown to glide along the edges of those little strokes I made and pull the hairs out. I can also give a little shadow to each of the hairs on the inside, and it helps with that 3-dimensional look. So that's how you get that fluffy texture. I've got 3 more to show you. A veiny leaf, a rough twig, and water droplets. If you can draw water droplets, you'll amaze all your friends, so I'll save the best for last. To create this leaf vein texture of sunken veins with raised parts of the leaf in between, I could use my stylus to impress lines, but I have a little different plan for this. I'm going to use a colored pencil Resist. It's a little softer, a little bit more malleable. I can work it a little bit longer. So I'll show you how that works, and then I'll finish off this leaf for you. I'm going to use a cream colored pencil to impress the veins. The main vein on a leaf is always big, so I'm going to do that one first. There went my pencil, and I'm pressing at about a 4 pressure. Remember that veins on leaves aren't the same from end to end. They get smaller as they get toward the tip. I'll start in that vein, and with a sharper point of my pencil, start to lift out the secondary veins. So I'm pressing in, not quite as hard this time. And this is a little easier than the stylus because you can actually see what you're doing. It's really important that the veins connect. This is the blood supply, so to speak, of a leaf. So let me show you what can go wrong too. It's such a good technique, but if I do thick, heavy lines throughout, or I try to pretend that they are curvy, when I go in and add my green, I'll end up with something kind of weird. That doesn't look too great. And it doesn't look realistic. But let me show you what happens with this. If I've used a good pencil technique, I get realistic looking veins. And all I have to do is build color over these, and they're saved for me until I finish my drawing. So that's just what I did here. I've added a couple of layers of color already. I'm making my green so far out of just blue and yellow. And the blue and yellow that I chose are the ochre color and this dark indigo. I'm using this green, not really a leaf color, but I'm using it as a topper. I want to show you what to do when you lose a highlight. You can see the nice highlights here that help bump up the leaf, but I've kind of drawn through them over here. So I'm going to pull those up right away. If I pull up too much, not a problem. I can always add more pigment. Then I'll start building this leaf color. I'm using the dark blue to help me create shadows. And I'm using the yellow to turn those shadows green. I want to be careful to stay out of those highlights, but if I don't, I could just lift them up again. So let's add a little bit of our green to this. And being sure that I keep enough dark to make these little areas round up. If I kept going, this side would just look like this side, and we'd have a nice bumpy leaf with expressive veins. Another texture I'd like to show you is a rough little twig. For this one, I used that rough scumble stroke that we worked on when we were working with pencil strokes, and I'll show you kind of what that looked like. I started with a gray for the bark, with this little scumbly stroke, and each successive pencil, I was sure not to go exactly the same direction. I want all those colors to bleed through and enhance that look of roughness. You'll notice that I added a little bit of purple into the shadows. Even when you're drawing something brown, you don't want to leave it with just shades of one color. And as it happens, brown is really a neutralized orange, neutralized by adding blue. So when I added purple, I'm bringing in a little of the complement. The blue in the purple is working for me here. Now what I don't really have is a nice highlight. So let me show you how to use the wax paper to pull that up a little bit. I'm going to go into the lighter area and do that same scumble stroke with my waxed paper. You can see where it lifted. There's the pencil coming off onto the wax paper, and it lifts some highlight out of that twig. The last thing that I'm going to do is actually use my black pencil. I rarely use a black except for on something like bark. It's a little strong for the plant material that I usually draw, but I can go in and just tip in a few little darks that help enhance that rough texture. This is an easy one. You should definitely try drawing a twig. The last texture I'd like to show you is a water droplet. Water has an interesting quality to it called surface tension. So when you're drawing a water droplet, remember that on this surface, the droplet doesn't sit like that. It actually sits like this. So the darkest part of the water droplet is that shadow that it casts. It will always be an oval or a circle unless gravity is pulling the droplet down, in which case it might be sort of more like a teardrop shape. There's a specular highlight where the light hits. That is a bright white. The dark shadow falls opposite that. So here comes our light. Here's the shadow. There's another little highlight within the shadow. And then the tone on the water droplet is divided roughly in thirds. Darkest toward the front of the water droplet, medium in the middle, and lightest toward the back. Here's how that works. We'll add a little droplet to this scenario. I'm going to give myself a shape, being sure that I don't square off any corners. I'll lightly put in a highlight so I know where I'm going. And the very next place I'm going is to that dark shadow. I'll start with my indigo pencil for that. The shadow is the shape of the droplet. It's a nice oval shape. And I'll leave my little highlight in there. If you draw a couple of bigger drops, the little tiny ones will make sense even though you can't get quite as much detail in them. So I'm tucking the shadow right behind the droplet, and I'll place a little bit of dark right on that front edge. Once again, I'm going to divide this thing into thirds and then blend it all together. Here's my second color, a medium blue. If I were drawing a droplet on a green leaf, the droplet would be green as well. And here's my lighter color. Looks okay, but I really need to blend this, and I'm going to use a white. But I'll add a little bit of black under that shadow and a little more dark on the front edge. So I'd keep polishing that, but you get the idea. That's how you draw a water droplet. For your homework, look around and find a few textures that you'd like to duplicate. Notice how the order of the steps that you take changes the look of the texture. If you're going to impress lines, do that first. If you're going to use solvent, you can use it anytime. In our next lesson, we're going to bring all of this color and texture and pencil work together.